Welcome to this online tutorial. We'll be talking about some of the introductory ideas in genetics. Specifically, what is DNA, what is a gene, what is a chromosome, an allele, a genotype and a phenotype, and how do they all relate. Okay, so starting off with DNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, it's our genetic code. It's the code that makes us up. Now, it has this funky structure that we call a double helix. Now that might be a new word to you, a word we need to learn in genetics, but it resembles a twisted ladder. Now it's made up of a sugar phosphate backbone, and what would make the rungs of the ladder or of our double helix are our base pairs. Now base pairs are A and T, G and C. Now this is our base pair rule. T and A will only pair together, G and C will only pair together. Okay. If not, we get something we're going to talk about in a later video, but we won't touch on that now. These do have names, but for our level, you only really need to know A, T, G and C, and we're going to leave it there. So, these base pairs, or this section of DNA, if we were to draw it out, okay, our A, T, G, C, T, A, C, G, etc. Our base pairs that form are like a code. Now if we get a section of this code, okay, and it codes for a particular trait, we now have a gene. So we have our DNA, our genetic material that consists of a sugar phosphate backbone, and our base pairs A, T, G and C, which act like a code. If we get a section of that code, a section of that DNA that codes for a particular trait, we get a gene. Now, these genes code to make things that we call proteins, which we're also going to touch on in another video, we're not going to go into now. But they specifically will code for a trait. Okay. Now, this DNA, when it forms a very long strand, are going to form what we call chromosomes. Okay. Now for us, we have 46 chromosomes in 23 pairs. Now we call these homologous pairs. So I'm going to draw a pair together. Okay. So we have this long strand of DNA that forms a chromosome, of which we have 46, and they're in pairs, and we call this an homologous pair. And they are chromosomes. Okay. So just like we had a section of DNA that coded for a particular trait in this section, we may also have one in this section on our chromosome. Okay. This section would also be a gene. It would code for a particular trait. Now we might use the example of eye color. And this one will be brown eyes. Okay, which we're going to denote with a big B. Now, our homologous pairs, the genes on each of these pairs actually correspond, which means that they match up. So if I've got a gene for eye color on this section of the chromosome, I'm also going to have one on this side. Okay. Now let's imagine that this gene here is also for eye color, but it is for blue eyes. Okay, which we're going to denote with a little b. Now we've got something strange going on. We've got two genes which code for a similar thing. They code for the same thing, eye color, but they're different versions. Okay, we've got brown and we've got blue. Now these are our alleles. Okay. Now an allele is just a different version of a gene. So we have a long strand of DNA that makes up a chromosome. We have pairs of chromosomes that have matching sections of DNA or genes. They match up, they correspond. Okay. And in our example, we've got one chromosome that has a gene for eye color, which is brown, one chromosome that has a gene for eye color that is blue. They're different versions of the same gene, so they're alleles. Okay. Now, the genes that we have for this particular trait, these here, okay, big B and little b, is our genotype. Okay. Genotype is just the genes we have for a trait. For a particular okay. So just to run through that again, we have our sections of DNA forming our chromosomes. They come in pairs, they correspond. Okay, we get different versions of the same gene. We call these alleles, and these alleles that we have for a particular trait form our genotype. Okay, what genes we have, the type of genes we have for a particular trait. So we've talked about DNA, gene, chromosome, allele, and genotype. We've just got to talk about phenotype now. So our genes here are actually coding for a particular trait. Now, bear with my terrible drawing skills, but we've discussed it coding for eye color. Now, here, and we'll discuss on why in another video, but our brown eyes are dominant. It's our dominant gene. So we're going to end up with brown eyes if this is our genotype. Okay. So we've got a genotype for a particular trait, which is our eye color. We've got it here, big B, little b, and that's resulted in brown eyes. This is our phenotype. Now, phenotype is just the physical expression of our genotype. So to run through that one more time, we have DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. It is the code, our genetic code, that pretty much makes us. Okay, it's structured in a double helix, a twisted lattice structure with a sugar phosphate backbone and base pairs as rungs. Our rungs, or our base pairs, have a rule they follow. A will only pair with T, G will only pair with C. When we get a section of these pairs, they form a code, and that code will code for a particular trait. That would be our gene. Now these sections of DNA, these big long strands, form up our chromosomes, which we have pairs of. These homologous pairs have these sections in corresponding order, they match. Okay, meaning that I have a gene here that will be similar to the gene on this side, but they can be slightly different. They can be different versions of the same gene, and that's our allele. The alleles that we have, or the genes that we have for a particular trait, is our genotype. Okay, the genes we have for a particular trait, and how those genes actually manifest physically in our life are our phenotype, our physical expression of our genotype. So that's most of it. To tie it back in with our junior biology and what we know about cells, hopefully remember that in an animal cell we have a nucleus that contains our genetic material. Okay, if we use a human example, our genome, all the DNA we have, our entire DNA makeup is our genome, and for us that's going to be 23 homologous pairs, so 46 chromosomes but paired into 23 pairs. We take one of these chromosomes out, we look at it, we see that it has these sections of DNA that code for a particular trait. That's our gene. Hopefully that's been helpful, team. This is it isn't a particular answer, but it is enough information for you to answer some pretty common NCEA questions. Hopefully get out there and enjoy it.